Sorry to keep y'all waiting. So heck of a celebration in that locker room, as you guys can imagine. First of all, I want to thank our fans. That environment tonight may have been the greatest I've ever been a part of, starting with the Gamecock Walk, the 2001 Sandstorm, just the advantage that they gave us throughout the night. I told the players at the hotel, we haven't gotten off to good starts here at home, and I don't know if it's because we're caught up in 2001 Sandstorm and Gamecock Walk, and then we don't get out there and execute like we should. So I told the team at the hotel literally right before we came over here that I understand the crowd's going to be a great advantage for us, but we're not going to win the game because of the crowd. And I may have screwed that up because of the noise they created, the false starts they caused. Thank you. That was awesome environment, and I'm so happy for all of Gamecock Nation. It's been a long, however many, 8 years or whatever since we beat those guys. So I want our fans to celebrate the heck out of that one.
All right. Welcome into the GamecockScoop.com podcast. That video was courtesy of Gamecocks Online, by the way. Thank you for the University of South Carolina for letting us use press conference videos. So yeah, the crowd last night in South Carolina's 30-24 win.
30-24.
What did I say?
32.
Oh yeah, 30-24 win. Was obviously a huge factor from pretty much the word go. I don't know if he mentioned how many false starts there. I saw 8 in the stat box last night, and then I saw you wrote 7 in the story this morning.
I think there was one on the last drive that I missed, so I think it ended up being 8.
I got you. Yeah. So either way, tons of false starts last night. Pretty much all of them you could tell were caused by the crowd. You had an early fumble because the center snapped the ball thinking that the cadence was good to go, and it wasn't. So crowd was a huge factor throughout the game last night. And that was the first time you've kind of seen Williams-Brice in its full glory. So I did want to kind of start with your reaction. By the way, I'm Caleb Alexander. This is Alan Cole. Kind of, we're both sort of feeling it this morning after a late night and, celebrating with Gamecock Nation. Also, before you answer that question, I got a new background.
You do?
Jeff Blake over at
USA Today.
USA Today got Shane Beamer doing the whole like gladiator thing. Are you not entertained? So yeah, I like that. All right. So what's your thoughts on the atmosphere from last night?
Insane. I thought Spencer Rattler actually said it best. He said he could feel it in his chest when Xavier Legette took the opening kickoff back. No, the press box was shaking after Legette's kick return. It was student section crazy. I mean, 8 false starts kind of says it all. I mean, they did not stop all night, and that's a legitimate. Was one of the better environments I've ever been in. And Shane Beamer called it the best he's ever been in. Period. In that clip. Crazy crowd. I don't know. You've been to a lot of games there. You've been to way more than I have, but that was a lot.
Yeah, I mean, from what I could tell on TV, it was up there with the best that I've seen. When 6 minutes had passed in the game or whatever, and South Carolina is already up 17-0, and that place is going insane. You were like, "What is happening?" You texted me like, "What is happening?" And I was like, it's nighttime at Willie B. Yep. I mean, it kind of reminded me a little bit. Of course, it didn't stay throughout, and the stakes weren't quite as high, but it reminded me a little bit of the 2012 Georgia game at the beginning, where just everything was going right there at the beginning, and the stadium was fully behind you as everything was going right. So it's just like a linchpin ready to explode. The SEC Network mentioned that it was the best environment that they had been, or whoever it was. I think it was Cole Kubelik mentioned it was the best atmosphere he'd been in all season. Yeah, I mean, the fans brought it, and it really was a factor. And I wrote about it in my rapid reaction. You can find my rapid reaction on GamecockScoop.com. You can find Alan's game story and then his sort of Sunday morning deep dive on GamecockScoop.com this morning. But I wrote in my rapid reaction that this is what led to 18 straight home wins back in the Spurrier era from 2010 to 2013. Is you had this incredible environment. You had the team that could kind of ride the wave that momentum. Now, obviously, we're not quite there yet, but if you want to get back there, this is going to be a factor in getting back there. And the hope is that you're going to have plenty more of nights like that at Williams-Brice. You got another 4 p.m. kickoff next week for homecoming against Missouri. Should be ranked. We'll have the AP poll probably release here and
2:00 Eastern, so 2.5 hours from now.
Yeah, but I mean, we talked about it leading up to the game. They were maybe 28th, 29th if you look at the
others receiving
votes.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think that this win probably catapults them right there around that back end. So we'll see.
I don't know who. I honestly didn't even look at that much of the rest of the scoreboard. Kind of parsing through it now in terms of like teams ranked at the bottom of the poll who lost. I guess Texas lost. They were number 20. Trying to think. Mississippi State was 24. They lost. They'll drop. Yeah. I mean, I guess the bottom of the poll didn't lose that much. So we'll see. But either way, just if they keep winning, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, you're at 5-2 as well, so you got to kind of look at what the records of some of the other teams at the bottom are. Kansas State at 17. They probably won't drop out though.
They lost, yeah.
Either
way,
we'll
keep winning.
We'll see soon. But anyway, yeah, so the game started obviously pretty electric. Xavier Legette takes the opening kickoff 102 yards. Perry McCarty, who is one of our writers at Gamecock Scoop, we had like the group chat going during the game, and he was like, that was one of those moments where like, no, yes. Because yeah, I mean, it didn't seem like the smartest decision to take it out, but obviously Legette saw something that he liked there, and he broke a couple tackles and he was gone. I mean, it took him 14 seconds to go 102 yards. It wasn't necessarily like the straightest, speediest return.
No,
but
I thought he was down at like the 35 or 40 because there were 2 or 3 A&M tackling, and I even there was thinking that's a pretty good return for shoving in your own end zone, 35-40. But it's that last tackler once he kind of like steps over him, I think, for lack of a better term, and then he's got nothing but grass in front of him.
Yeah, and he honestly had 2 pretty big plays in the special teams. I wrote about he and Josh Van, who have kind of been this sort of background senior wide receivers throughout the year. Josh Van had a couple big catches, including a 20-yard catch and run on the last touchdown drive for South Carolina, which was that 8-play, 80-yard drive. So he had a big moment, and then Xavier Legette had the big kick return touchdown, and then also on the Texas A&M or the kickoff right after the last touchdown for South Carolina, he ran down the field and like crushed Devin A-Chain to kind of keep that momentum going. Of course, you know, Texas A&M did put together a drive there, but I still thought that was kind of a cool moment to see him make a big play on both kickoff return and kickoff. So yeah, beginning of the game was kind of a whirlwind. You have Xavier Legette return of 102 yards. Then you have Darius Rush gets an interception, returns it down to the 5. Then South Carolina decides to throw the ball 3 times, which we'll talk a little bit about Marshawn Lloyd and his lack of use in the first half there. He only had 3 carries in the first half. They tried to throw the ball 3 times. Drive stalls, kick a field goal, up 10-0, and then you get another Tonka Hemingway scoop. He didn't go quite as far this time, but he still scooped up and ran a little bit. Like I said, the crowd was a big factor there because the center just kind of like snapped it off of Haynes King knee, and it fell directly into Tonka Hemingway's hands. And Christian Bill Smith scored from like 8 yards out or so, I think, on that, which he looked good on that run. But then it was kind of weird from there that it seemed like Marcus Satterfield just wanted to keep riding the hot hand with Christian Bill Smith or whatever. But from there, he didn't really do a whole lot. I wrote in the rapid reaction, Christian Bill Smith and Juju McDowell, I think, had like 12 carries for 11 yards or something through the rest of the game from there, which, like, you know, not talking shade on them. They're both excellent players. They both will need to be used as a changeup. But it was definitely baffling that in the first half, Marshawn Lloyd only got 3 carries. And then, you know, in the second half, they turned it on, gave him 15. You saw what happened from there. He ended up with 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. But yeah, definitely don't see a path where as an offensive coordinator, you don't build your game plan around Marshawn Lloyd from here on out. I mean, I thought that was already established, but maybe not.
No, yeah. I think I texted you after the field goal drive. Well, I say drive. It was 3 plays, 0 yards. I'm not really sure why Marshawn Lloyd didn't get the ball there. You're probably looking at 14-0 at that point, and then 21-0 if he does. I don't really know what to do with that. This A&M secondary, we talked about it during the pre-show during the week. That's a very good unit. They had South Carolina's receivers frustrated most of the night. There really wasn't much separation on the perimeter. This wasn't a game where you saw shots down the field. There were a couple of good throws from Spencer. But no, that was another game where it kind of felt like they needed to run the ball to win, and it didn't really. I don't know if that point was driven home until that last touchdown drive. But that's the way it was trending pretty much most of the night.
Yeah, and I see that there are several of you watching us live right now. Thanks for watching, by the way. Feel free to comment wherever you're at, Twitter, YouTube. I should be able to see them over here, and we can answer any of your questions. Just wanted to note that real quick. But yeah, so you get up 17-0, whole stadium's behind you, feeling really good. And then the offense just really can't do anything from there. So a lot of struggles in the first half. I believe you got outgained like 200 to 80 something yards in the first half.
214 to 98.
Okay, there you go. Let Texas A&M get back into it, 17-14. Had an opportunity on a drive right before the half where you hit Jalen Brooks on one of those deep throws that you did mention that Rattler did have a nice throw on. But unfortunately, you can't haul it in. So you go into the half 17-14, and I put in the game thread at that point, like, all right, pregame, you're leading 17-14. You're probably pretty happy about that result. But, after that first quarter where you're up 17-0 and you tell someone you're leading 17-14, you're probably not too happy. But to South Carolina's credit, the defense, sort of played pretty well throughout the entire game. Gave up some yards, but I mean, that's going to happen. Devin A-Chain had 90 yards rushing on 20 carries, 99 yards rushing on 20 carries, but he also had a 30-yard carry in there. So it was really like, other than that, 19 carries for 60-something yards. So really kept him in check for the most part. Second half, you do enough on offense. You start to actually hand the ball to Marshawn Lloyd. Like I said, he had 15 carries in the second half and pieced together 2 touchdown drives that are really the difference in this one. Any other major takeaways before we sort of like try to get in the weeds of each side of the ball and everything?
I mean, that pretty much is it. I think that's a good example of just finding, it's so cliche, I almost hate saying it, just finding a way to win. I wrote a little bit about this in my piece that went up this morning, but that was a grind it out, figure out a way to get this done. Offense stalled out for like 2.5 quarters and they just pushed through.
Yeah, you had another couple of key turnovers, like we mentioned. Of course, South Carolina continues to struggle with their own turnovers. Spencer Rattler fumbled. Juju McDowell fumbled. No interceptions, though, right?
Correct.
Hey, that's progress. The defensive line, I'm sorry, everyone. I just burped directly in the mic. The defensive line really had their way with Texas' offensive line, I thought, through large portions of the game. Of course, Texas A&M's offensive line was missing quite a few people for injury, including the starting center, which the broadcast talked about how the starting center was trying to coach up the backup center after the fumbled exchange early in the first quarter. But yeah, I thought pretty much everyone on the defensive line played very well, especially the 2 guys that we've been talking about that needed to step up this season and really have so far in Jordan Birch and Zach Pickens. Birch led the team in tackles. Pickens led the team in quarterback hurries. They're kind of hitting Haynes King all night. They didn't get a ton of sacks, but they definitely made their pressure felt, including on the early interception to Darius Rush, and ultimately hit him enough times that he had to go out of the game. Connor Wegman comes in, really struggles except for on the last drive. And that's kind of the story of the game on defense.
Yeah. It all starts at the tip of the sword, and they were getting guys in and out. This was a return game for Boogie Huntley. I thought he played pretty well. There was one point where I think it was before a third down play where They had MJ Webb, Tonka Hemingway, and Zach Pickens on the field, and then A&M called timeout, and they kind of changed the look up a little bit. No, the defensive tackles played really well. It's kind of the same thing as the Chris Rodriguez conversation. Devin Achane is just going to get yards. He's too good of a back not to. But you keep other than the 30-yard run, they kept the big play in check. They did give up a touchdown, which they didn't do to Rodriguez. That was late third quarter. But again, if you're kind of taking the whole 30,000-foot level realistically, that's about as well as you can hope to do against a back like that. And then you add in affecting the passing game, moving Haynes King off his spots, causing an interception, like you said. Yeah, that's I don't know, call it a B+ game for the defensive line, maybe even A-.
I felt like Tonka Hemingway had another game. He, stepped in while Boogie Huntley has been injured, and he's really become like a 1A, 1B situation Huntley there.
And with Tonka, I think it has to be pointed out that, and Beamer gave him a game ball for this, after South Carolina's touchdown to go up 30-21, that extra point is blocked. Tonka Hemingway pushes the A&M returner out of bounds. That keeps it a 9-point game, because if that gets run back, it's 30-23, and A&M has the ball with the chance to tie it. That is a hustle play from Tonka Hemingway. That's something Shane Beamer's talked about, like effort on extra points after giving, just effort on extra points in general. He saved 2 points there.
Yeah, I mean, we talked early in the season. I can't remember which player it was now. I think it was after the Georgia State game, or maybe after Charlotte, but they're talking about special teams, and they were talking about how the culture built around special teams on this team is like, you kind of want to be on special teams. Like, it's like, you have some of your biggest impact players playing special teams and making plays on special teams. And that's just another example of they take it very seriously. It's not something that they just kind of mail in and take lightly like a lot of other teams do, that they really view it as an impact portion of this game. And again, it was. I mean, you have the touchdown on the opening play, kind of sets the tone, and you have a big play there to seal it in a lot of ways.
Kai Koger, by the way, too, 49 yards average on his punts, had stuck another one inside the 5.
Yeah, so he had 3 inside the 20. He had 3 that were 50+ yards. There were several times when South Carolina's offense was struggling. They, weren't even moving the ball out of their own end of the field, that he was able to flip the field and make it tough for the Texas A&M offense, and give your defense, a little bit of room to work with, and it continued to work out for him. So yeah, that was a big factor that maybe gets overlooked a little bit. On offense, it was an up and down game. We keep having sort of the same conversation here. Ultimately got it done. Only Marshawn Lloyd's running stat line looks pretty good, and you do have to keep in mind that the first quarter at least, you take away an offensive possession because of the kickoff return, and then you had 2 very short fields. And Spencer Rattler, I saw mention in the pregame or the postgame that it was sort of tough to get into a rhythm, and I do buy that, right? Like you don't have you don't have your usual drives where you're figuring things out, because you have really short fields that you're on. That said, I still think it's pretty inexcusable that Marshawn Lloyd doesn't get a carry from the 5 on that drive that we already mentioned, and that he ended the first half with only 3 carries. It seemed like you're forcing the issue with Christian Bill Smith and Juju McDowell there, which, again, important players, but at this point, I think should be solidly backing up Marshawn Lloyd. I mean, it even got to the point where I texted you and I was like, did Lloyd go into the tent? Did we miss an injury somewhere? Like, why is he not on the field right now? Obviously, something changed at halftime. I know Shane Beamer mentioned on the broadcast, and I saw he mentioned at postgame that he went to Satterfield and was like, get the ball to your key players, which seems like a kind of obvious thing for an offensive coordinator to know. But whatever he said, they started to get the ball to their key players.
Yeah, we kind of already talked through the first drive. I'll be honest, the one that really got me from a play calling perspective was after South Carolina goes up 24-14, that touchdown drive. It's the one that started around midfield. Lloyd got the ball 5 out of 6 plays, had the 18-yard touchdown. Defense forces a 3 and out. You have the ball back. You were up 10. This is like 2 minutes to go in the third quarter. and it was a deep ball that they were setting up a deep ball in the first play of that next drive. Spencer Rattler gets hit, fumbles, balls out. Next thing you know, you're in a sudden change situation, and the momentum is back on the A&M sideline. I think I used the term "no need for it" in the game thread, but at that point, there really was no need for anything other than just pounding, running the ball, even some play action, which I don't think we've seen a ton of anyway. It's just, I think they're trying a little bit too hard to work the deep shots in there. We've talked about that before, about not trying to force that, especially last night against a team with good coverage corners. You don't have to take a shot even if you haven't yet. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, well, it's 2 weeks in a row where you're trying to force the issue against a team's strength, right? We talked about how Kentucky's safeties play very disciplined in that deep zone, and yet they still tried to attack the deep zone instead of taking what they got underneath. They finally figured it out in the second half. And yeah, same thing here. You're going against the strength of the A&M defense, which is their pass rush and their secondary, instead of, trying to lean on them and pound on them where they have. We talked about they have talent on that defensive line, but a lot of that talent's young, and a lot of young talent in the ACC struggles a little bit against the run early before they can put the whole game together. But they're a little bit better when they can just kind of pin their ears back and rush the passer. So yeah, that was sort of baffling to me. I don't want to be overly negative. They won the football game. They scored 30 points. Granted, some of that short field, some of that special teams, whatever. But yeah, and I said this last night in the game thread. It's been a long time since you felt like South Carolina was a good enough team to bumble their way to a win over a average to above average team in Texas A&M. So you can't complain too much. It's a weird game. Shane Beamer said, that he sort of was pulling his hair out at different parts of the game, that we almost had a heart attack a couple times, whatever. But ultimately, you get the win, and so I don't want to be overly negative here. You've won 4 straight. You're sitting at 5-2. You are on the precipice of being ranked. We'll see that later. You got 2 very winnable games ahead of you. And yeah, I mean, we talked about it in leading up to the week. These were the last 2 games, really. These were 2 swing games. You wanted one of the 2. You got both. You got some more very winnable games coming up, and then maybe you steal one from Florida, Tennessee, Clemson, and you're feeling pretty good about the season. I mean, I think you should feel pretty good about the season regardless of what happens the rest of the way at this point. I mean, obviously you got to take care of business the next 2 weeks, but sitting about as good as you could hope through the first 7.
Yeah, no, for sure. This is, I think, if anybody had offered 5-2 through 7 games before the season started, you're taking it. And that's, like you said, Missouri and Vanderbilt the next 2 weeks. You have to play those games. Missouri's defensive line is going to be a challenge, especially for this running game. Vanderbilt, they're pretty game. I mean, they almost beat Missouri yesterday. They had a double-digit lead on Ole Miss at halftime, I think. That's not necessarily going to be easy, but it's a game you would expect South Carolina to win based on the talent differential. And maybe you're sitting 7-2 going to the Swamp. Probably, maybe. Again, you kind of have to take the 10,000-foot level. And I think the point about, bumbling through games, this is kind of what I wrote about, the main thing, but got the ball back, 8.5 minutes, 3-point lead. Shane Beamer, and I asked him this, what he said. He walked up to the offense and said, enough's enough. Go put some points up and win this game. 8 plays, 80 yards. Enough was enough.
Yeah, and you got the ball, your key players there, right? We talked about the Van 20-yard catch. I believe Jalen Brooks had a catch on that drive.
Yep.
Bell carried the ball for a first down on that drive. Marshawn Lloyd sort of set up that drive with a big run. Went
24
out
yards. Yep.
24 yards. Went out because he got his helmet ripped off and it kind of like dinged his eye or something for a second. And then came back in and immediately scored a touchdown when he came back in. So sort of bookended that drive there too. And yeah, I mean, when the chips were down, like you said, they rose to the occasion. We called it the drive of the season, drive of the Beamer era, whatever you want to call it. That's the best drive I've seen from them thus far in a key moment.
Yeah, and they had one of those against Kentucky. It was in the third quarter. It was kind of similar. They're up 14-7 at that. They stalled out there in the red zone. They kicked a field goal. That was the same type of drive as the one they had in Lexington, just in terms of the ball control, getting the ball to their best players sort of thing. But they finished it, and they needed to, because a field goal there, you're only up 6, and you're putting the game on your defense to finish it out.
Definitely. And yeah, you mentioned Missouri and Vandy, not to like look too far ahead. Those are both games you can lose. I know that someone asked Beamer in the post game, like, how do you get your feet back on the ground after this? Obviously, they did it after Kentucky, but you had the advantage of the bye week. You can't get too high on yourself here. I mean, both of those teams could beat you if you go in over confident. You hope that you have a similar environment next week against Missouri and continue to start strong. This is something that we have talked about all season, especially in the season, that they were struggling last season and struggling the first few games this season to start early. Well, the last 2 weeks they've started early. You got to keep that going. Scored in 13 seconds against Kentucky and 14 seconds last night against Texas A&M. I don't know if you'll start quite that fast, or that you can rely on starting quite that fast, but they need to continue to seize the momentum early, especially really at home and on the road. At home to get your crowd in, and not on the road to kind of quiet the other crowd. And then they're doing enough on defense and on offense to kind of finish the job.
And that's all you're really asking for at this point, right? Is just finishing the job, finishing football games. I'm not going to count Charlotte and SC State as much. Those games were decided by the third quarter. But the last 2 weeks, they have finished the game with touchdown drives late to put the nail in the coffin.
Yeah. You start to think about like the pecking order of the SEC. The goal of this season was to kind of work your way up into the middle tier, like maybe upper middle. I mean, you look at the East, obviously Georgia and Tennessee are sitting there at the top, but over the next 2 weeks, you can kind of solidify your position as the third best team in the East, maybe the fourth best team in the East, depending on how things go against Florida. I think you got to be happy with where you're sitting right now.
At this exact moment, they are technically third in the East. They're tied with Kentucky, but obviously they have the tiebreaker at 2-2 in the league. Yeah, there's no reason you can't beat Missouri and Vanderbilt. That'll get you to 4-2 in the league. And yeah, you're right. That third in the East probably comes down to the trip to Gainesville. And that kind of determines you finishing. I don't want to write the Tennessee game off completely a month away, but are you finishing 4-4 or 5-3 in the conference? And that's probably 7 or 8, or I don't know. You said 9 this week. That still seems like a little bit of a stretch to me, but I guess it's on the table. I mean, kind of where you're finishing.
Maybe 9 with a bowl win.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's kind of tough to project Tennessee or Clemson at this point, because I think if you enter that stretch with seven
in a row, if they beat Florida,
7 straight wins. I mean, there's something to be said, especially in college football, for momentum. I think you're probably going to feel pretty confident whether you actually match up against that team or not, but you're at home, you got momentum. That's going to be a nationally televised.
Have you thought about the possibility of 10-0/9-1 Tennessee against 8-2 South Carolina hosting game day?
It's certainly possible. I mean, yeah.
I don't know what else is that week. It's week 12. We're just getting through week 8. But
I was trying to think if there's any way that you have that be like relevant for the SEC East.
There's not.
But yeah, I mean, I don't see Georgia losing another game outside of Tennessee.
You would need Georgia to lose 3 because they haven't lost one yet, and you're down 2 with the tiebreaker.
Well, unless you get a 3-way tie, you get Tennessee losing.
Are we really doing this?
No, I mean, it's not going to happen. You're right. But like you said, definitely an opportunity to solidify your position third in the East, and that's nothing to be ashamed of this year when you got two top five teams as the 1 and 2.
Speaking big picture, for those of you guys who like Florida, there were reps from the Citrus Bowl and the Gator Bowl there last night in the press box.
Yeah, you got to start to think that those are possibilities. If you get to 8 wins, I think it's almost locked up that you're going to go to Florida in some form, unless maybe you end up at the Peach Bowl. But
they were there last night. That's a playoff semifinal. I don't know why they were there.
Maybe they were. Yeah, I don't know either.
I can't even concoct a scenario where A&M or South Carolina is in the college football playoff. But there was a rep there last night.
And yeah, if you somehow win 4 of the last 5. Maybe you're sitting at 9 wins at the end of the season.
You're not going to the playoff at 9-3. Like, what are we talking about?
Oh no, not the playoff. Do they not have a?
No, the playoff semifinal is the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl this year. Like, that's who was there last night in the press box.
I thought they had an NY6
nope.
bowl as well. All right, you're right. There's no scenario.
I don't understand what was happening there.
Unless it turns into 2007 and just like everyone starts losing in the top 5 and it goes crazy. But anyway, so do you have anything to say about Mizzou as we look ahead to next week? Or
I caught a little bit of that game yesterday. That was on in the press box because that was the SEC Network game before the broadcast flipped to South Carolina. That defensive line, that's kind of what I said earlier, is going to be tough. They've stopped the run well this year. They kind of bottled up Georgia's running game. Even in that game, they pulled close. That's going to be a test for this offensive line, a test for Marshawn Lloyd. I'm curious to kind of see what the game plan looks like because this is kind of a flip. This is a game where Missouri secondary is the weaker part. It's kind of not what you had the last 2 weeks. And it might be a game where you can throw the ball down the field more, but I'm not sure if that's A, what you should do, or B, if that's what would work more. But I also think this is a game where South Carolina's defense really should feast because that Missouri offense is struggling a lot. I mean, 17 against Vanderbilt yesterday, 17 against Florida the game before. I think it was 22 against Georgia. They're 17 against Auburn. They're not scoring points. And South Carolina's defense should be able to kind of take over next week in an ideal world if you're Shane Beamer.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just gotta, like we said, keep your feet on the ground. You got a home environment, you got homecoming, all those fun things, and you should be able to just kind of ride your defense and find a way to manufacture enough points to win that one.
You got a spread guess? We do this every Sunday, but what do you think that we should know later today? What's the opening point spread going to be?
That's tough because I think if South Carolina is ranked, that's sort of, of course, it's the opening spread, so Vegas doesn't really care if they're ranked or not. I'm going to call it 8.
So that seems about right. 8. More than a touchdown, but not quite like a touchdown to field goal. Like stay within those key numbers of 7 and 10. Yeah, that seems right.
And then, yeah, whether or not the line moves from there, I think will somewhat depend on if South Carolina is ranked, just because
people look at numbers.
This is going to be the first week that I think people start to talk about South Carolina from a national perspective. I mean, I heard a couple on some national podcasts about the Kentucky game or whatever. But last night, I mean, outside of LSU beating Ole Miss, they were pretty much the main story on the SEC network. So I think there's going to be some more buzz after this one.
That rat poison Nick Saban always talks about.
Yeah, let's see if they buy it. Another thing that we can talk about throughout the week, check out GamecockScoop.com. I put out the visitors list on Friday. There were a lot of very important, especially 2024 visitors on campus, and that was a pretty cool show for them to see. I know Anthony Carey, who is a top-rated 2024 running back, was there. He was kind of trolling people on Twitter, saying like, "Hey, what if after South Carolina beats Texas A&M?" He said that before the game, and then of course they get the win. So after the game, he just put the little eyeball emojis everywhere. I wouldn't project that to happen like right now or anything, but I do think South Carolina's in good position there. You had another top-rated wide receiver, Jonathan Paylor, 4-star out of Providence Day in Charlotte, attending the game. You had Jaden Scott, who's another running back in the 2024 class that blew up at rivals camps this past spring. He was like one of the MVPs of the Atlanta camp. And that's just like the tip of the iceberg. There were so many very important recruits on campus this weekend. You also had Cam Scott out of Lexington, 5-star basketball recruit, taking his official visit, and I'm sure he took in the game as part of it. Lamont Paris, the opening.
The celebrity starter is what they call it.
Yeah, celebrity starter.
He's got to do it every week if they're going to keep scoring 17 in the first 6 minutes.
So yeah, I mean, really incredible environment. I've already heard from a couple, just generic like wow. And we'll have some more in-depth interviews throughout the week on GamecockScoop.com on that. I did just see that H-Man left us a comment. Thanks for commenting, H-Man. He says, Beamer talked about how we struggled to string wins together last year, so glad to see them carrying momentum this season. And that's, we did spend a little bit of time talking negative about the offense or whatever. But I think the big takeaway here is 4 straight. You got the momentum going. Beamer referenced, which I remember sitting in the media room after the Georgia game, and the vibes were bad. And someone asked if there was any quit in the team. Of course, you get the fun sound clip back then of Beamer being like, hell no. And he referenced it again last night saying like, what do you think? Is there quit in this team? We've won 4 straight since you asked that. And yeah, vibes are good right now. And you got to just keep riding that momentum wave.
First time, we didn't even mention this, first time since 2013 they've won 4 games in a row. That's Jadeveon Clowney's last year. That's significant. They didn't even win. I don't think they even won. Did they win 2 in a row last year? They started 2-0 against Eastern Illinois and East Carolina, but they didn't get to 3 in a row last year.
Yeah. So if you're a South Carolina fan, enjoy this. Try not to dwell too long on the negative. I'm not saying that those conversations don't need to be had at some point, but hey, you've won 4 straight. Enjoy where you're at. There were so many times since 2013 where you felt like you had a moment to capture momentum, to take a next step, and you fell flat on your face. And this is one of these last 2 weeks are examples of the opposite, where you had a moment, you seized the moment. It seems like things are rolling in the right direction. I'm not saying you're going to start competing for an SEC championship like this year or next even, but things are moving in the right direction. That seems obvious. Enjoy that.
Yeah, you're not a coach. You're not a player. You don't have to get back to the practice field tonight. You have till 3:59 next Saturday to not be nervous about South Carolina football.
Yeah. So we will obviously on GamecockScoop.com have some more reaction from the game. I know that Alan Cole's got his stats thing coming out tomorrow. We'll have some film breakdown from Perry McCarty. I'll have some recruit reaction. Lee Wardlaw will have some recruit reaction. And yeah, let's enjoy this. And then on the back half of the week, we'll start previewing Missouri. We'll be back here on Thursday to talk Missouri. And yeah, then have a good one, Gamecock Nation.
Yep.